Today's episode of the Mind Sculptors podcast is brought to you by TCG Player, your source for all your trading card game needs. Please consider using our link in the description for your next purchase, as it helps support the continued refinement of our show. This episode is also made possible through the gracious support of our Patreon members. If you wish to join this esteemed group, simply visit patreon.com/The Mind Sculptors and become part of the SCULPTY family today. And of course, if you prefer a simpler gesture, we invite you to subscribe, leave a like and comment on YouTube, or leave a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts as a most fitting offering to the ever-watchful algorithm Jesus.
Have you seen the thing going around on TikTok? There's a McDonald's in the Pentagon song.
You know, I'm not in touch with TikTok quite a lot.
I think you're not as chronically online as I am, is what it really comes down to. I sent it in our group chat. I think you need to open that up and watch this live, because it is. This will be playing in my head the entire time we're recording.
Yeah, I think one of my superpowers as a content creator is that I apart from like work and social life, like I'm a pretty decent grass toucher. I feel like
you're really good at unplugging.
Yeah.
And me, on the other hand, just sitting here in my cave, I'm just like, what's going on the internet?
Yeah, honestly. It's a really nice feeling, and it's nice to make boundaries for yourself, everybody. Yeah. Hey everyone, fun start to the Mind Sculptors episode.
Well, here I want to ruin your brain though.
Okay.
So I need you to pull this on. I sent it to you in our group chat.
Okay. I'm watching this video now.
Yeah, you're watching this video right now.
So what I'm taking it as is that if I'm the Mind Sculptors audience right now, we're gonna see a smash cut of me about to watch it and then my reaction afterwards, I'm assuming.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
1 minute later.
That's been stuck in your head?
That is just playing on loop in my head. If that should give you an insight into what my mental health is like, because that is playing on loop.
No, I'm concerned for you, my good friend, for sure. I am. Yeah. Okay. Sure. So in your head, there's that video, which I'm assuming we linked somewhere, unfortunately.
Yeah.
My brain is just going over the logistics of it. First of all, I'm like, how, you took enough of, they had to go through and find what pictures they wouldn't get taken out by the fucking government.
Really, I appreciate the attention to detail with it, honestly. Also, the second character in the video being Parappa the Rapper doll, I think is a nice callback to 90s vibe. Do you not know Parappa the Rapper?
Not even slightly. I've seen the picture of the thing. I have no idea what the fuck that means.
It's an old PlayStation 1 rhythm game is really all it was.
Okay.
And it was fucking wild, but
sure.
I think what we learn is I play more video game. Well, I'm more online.
Yeah, you're definitely more online for sure. I was also the kid who would get a console a generation late, right? Like, so when the PlayStation 3 would come out, my parents were like, hey, we know you've been wanting this PlayStation. Here's the PlayStation 2. And I'd be like, well, y'all did, you close. You're so close. So
we're way out in the weeds. We're here to talk about Magic the Gathering.
Here's your timestamp, that one guy.
Here's your timestamp, that one guy. We're here to talk about Bracket 5. And it's been a couple months since we have done a Power Rankings episode, since at the end of the year last year we did the tier list. And we didn't do one in January. So this is kind of the combined January, February, start of the year tier or power rankings.
Which is great too, because February's 3 or 4 days shorter than most months. Right? We get a little extra Feb in there. And by that I mean 2 to 3 days. That's how that works.
That is how the maths. So we're gonna get into this. We've got 10 decks here. Well, really 22 decks total, because we both have 11 because we have an honorable mention.
Can you remind everybody the qualifications that we tend to look at when addressing tournament decks?
Yeah, so usually with tournament decks, we want to see a minimum number of entries getting into the metagame over a period of time. Because this is pulling from 2 months, some of the threshold of 10 tended to pick up. Yeah, it picked up more than what you would see in an average month.
Yeah.
Normally you would not get 33 decks that kind of hit that 10 threshold.
Yeah.
But we did this month, so there were 33 there. And we tend to want to look at decks that have a reasonable overall win percentage, as well as a top 16 percentage that is like, at least around a 15%, because 15% for like top 16 is like kind of like the average. And so if you can at minimum hit that, you're at least doing well.
Yeah, and we're also looking at 50 plus size tournaments, correct?
60 these days.
Ooh,
now because,
okay. We're moving.
Well, I can't filter from 50 or more anymore. So
that's right. Rest in peace.
Yeah. That's a whole saga. I've had to make a complete other spreadsheet to help me get the data off of EDH top 16 now, because they reformatted the whole thing.
Yeah, and it's tough too, right? Because we're in this age of cEDH where like there's a lot of like 40 plus tournaments, right? Like the 40 to 60 range is a really potent range for a lot of interesting decks and a lot of interesting experimentation. And unfortunately, we're missing a lot of it, right? Like I was at a tournament that just doesn't even register. I was at several tournaments actually last month that don't even register for this category here, right? So and not by a lot, right? Like by a couple placements. So it's a little tough. That's sort of a restriction we're dealing with when we talk about some of the hard numbers we're going to be talking about later. But on the other hand, like it's also a more apt number to how things are performing at a high level, right? So
it's a much more generalized look, than
Yep.
maybe what we looked at previously in the old
past,
website format. But
right.
still really good and helpful information.
Yeah.
Even if it took me like an extra half hour to get the information in.
Yeah, to generate all of it.
Yeah, guys, I made a deal with like an eldritch being to get this information for you.
Yeah.
It is the spreadsheet is cursed. I showed it to Ian before we started recording, and it is cursed.
I looked at it and went, wow, I would never. Glad you did.
You gotta love spreadsheets to come up with some of the shit, but
yeah.
Anyway, let's get into this. Let's start off here with your honorable mention, Ian. What do you have here in your not quite 10th, but your 11th spot, I guess?
Yeah, well, it's really interesting because the spreadsheet that we use, we have it organized by basically tournament entries. A couple other factors first, right? But tournament entries are one of the predominant factors. And one of the only decks with 10 tournament entries over the 2 months, but that had numbers that overrepresented performance, was Malcolm Kedis. I've noticed that it was one of the only ones with 40% conversion rate to top 16, a 20% conversion rate to top 4, right? Which is really, really good numbers. For example, some of the best decks in the format are looking at about like a 25% top 16 conversion, right? So like a 40% top 16 conversion from a deck that only has 10 representations. Obviously, it's easier if a good pilot is showing up and committing those results in. But at the same time, it's a strategy that I think everyone knows to respect a little bit, but no one's like, oh yeah, top tier deck in the format type mentality, right? Or else I think you'd see it represented more. But I do think Malcolm Kedis is a strong strategy. I think it's been a strong strategy for a long time. And I think there's definitely little subtleties, nuances, all that kind of malarkey that allows you to really optimize like why those decks perform at the way that they do. But at the end of the day, they're clean, right? Like that's the real thing.
It is a very clean deck.
Yeah, it's just 2 colors. You have a one card combo with your commander in the command zone, plus this just very efficient mana plan that like, does it get blown the fuck out by a Bowmasters? Absolutely, but so do a lot
what doesn't, right?
Right. Like,
that's kind of how I feel about most things. Whenever people are talking about, oh, well, you get blown out by Bowmasters, I'm like, okay, but like everything gets blown out by Bowmasters,
right.
Like,
that's up to you as the pilot to, put counterplay in the deck.
yeah, that's what you got to do. My honorable mention here, very similar vein, only had 10 entries this month or over the past 2 months, but had a wicked run over that time period, is Heliod the Radiant Dawn. Had a tournament win, 50% top 16 percentage, took down a tournament, couple top fours. Like, if you had asked me if that was a deck to watch out for, like, going into this year, I would have probably said no. But here you go. You got some dedicated pilots that took the deck and performed really well with it. And, I think I've kind of gone on record saying this. I said this a lot at MagicCon when people are asking me, my thoughts about the format and stuff like that. I was like, I think blue-white is just a really good place to be right now.
Yeah.
And, I think the success of this and some of the success I've seen some people have on Plagon is just like an example of that, right? Like, I think blue-white has a lot to offer.
Yeah, I think, blue-white's the best core right now, right? Like, it's blue-white and then building upon that, right? I guess you could argue it's maybe Dimir is the best core with blue-white as an attack.
And then, like,
right?
what are the best, like, X color to that?
Yeah,
right?
exactly. And so, like, it's funny, I don't even think about Heliod in the sense that, like, I don't underestimate it, because I have a local pilot here in Philadelphia named Juhas who, like, consistently top fours with that deck pretty often, if not top 16s, like most of our tournaments, right? And they don't show up on these a lot because these are 40-50 player tournaments, right?
Sure.
Still very viable, still 5-round cut to top, whatever, the same you would see at a 60-70 person event, right? Like almost the exact same numbers, the same qualifiers, right? It's just you're not seeing the results up there because they don't hit some of these thresholds. But yeah, straight up, I see this deck perform well in his hands all the time. So it's just, so not surprised to see it doing well. And then obviously being able to win one of the events out in, I want to say Brazil is.
I think it was Brazil. Yeah. I think that was right. Yeah, if I recall correctly. Look, I was honestly, that was another aspect of our data this month, is we pulled pretty international numbers for this data set. So this is a pretty wide, we're looking at, there's some South America going on here. There are a couple European tournaments that hit the data this month or this past 2 months. So
also, if you're in another country and you have these tournaments that are being reported, and if for some reason they're not on EDH Top 16, please feel free to send them to Cal and I, because we would love to at least like have them in the numbers at the very least, right?
Yeah, 100%.
I think most of them are on there, but just in case, feel free to hit us up. I'm super open to that stuff. As people who know me from working with the CCC stuff throughout the rest of the year, a large part of my initiative was, hey, let's make sure that we are respecting our global cEDH, right? And like that's a big thing for me.
And for me, like a lot of doing the like data portion of it, I use it for our content here. I think it's a very valuable tool, but I also post this stuff out so that people can just see what's going on, because I think that this is important stuff for people to be able to see. And we really don't have a number congregator like this out there that is able to, do this sort of information dump the way we see on other stuff like this, there's no shade at EDH Top 16, but the meta breakdown that we see on that website really doesn't give you any information. It just is, here are some deck lists.
You have to
here's
use
how much they're represented.
I think, to be appropriate, but I think the default settings are not always the best indicators for sure.
Well, you don't like get the granular, like what is the win percentage, how many tournament wins does it have, you know what I mean? And so I think that can impact your view on it, and I think you just get a clearer picture using this sort of stuff.
And I'm aware of some software coming out that is hopefully going to be a little more into that stuff, but I'm obviously not going to bury the lead here and promote anything that I don't have. It's not anything I'm personally attached to, just an individual who's working on some stuff who's reached out to me in the past.
Looking forward to hopefully hearing more about that. So but let's get into this top 10. Ian, here at number 10, what is your first number 10 for the year of 2025?
I have Sisei here.
Okay.
Sisei's numbers have been fine since the ban. They've been like not doing exceptionally well, but not doing exceptionally bad either. I feel like the numbers I'm seeing here are a little bit worse than I've been seeing it out in the wild. As I said,
It's
like I've
like
seen it
right on the averages.
yeah, yeah. And I've seen in top 4 a couple things that just like once again we're in those 50-40 range, right?
Mhm.
So I mean, obviously 10 is a pretty hefty fall from grace, but like I kind of agree with that in the sense that like I've been
Yeah.
trying a bunch of different Sisay things. You know, I was able to make a top 4 month. I want to say it was early January, maybe late December,
Mhm.
with my like oof Sisay, and like it felt fine, but it really did feel like I was putting in way more work than I ever used to make the deck
Mhm.
work, right? And that is a bit unfortunate. Uh, you know, and as I said, I think a couple of the tournaments where I've seen it do pretty well or decently at the very least have sort of fallen under some of the numbers we have here on our spreadsheet. But I do think Sisay is doing okay. I haven't really seen it break more than a few top 4s. I've seen it in a decent amount of top 16s, and it just shows up. It puts in the work, but it's like if you are in a pod with someone who knows how Sisay works,
Yep.
you sort of lost the explosive factor that it used to have where it could kind of get people out of nowhere. And so like if you're in a pod with a good Sisay pilot playing against you, so for example, like it doesn't even have to be on Sisay, but like someone who knows how Sisay works really intimately, right? Like say they play it in their local pod every week, or someone like myself who's played the deck.
A
I
considerable
can
amount.
dissect the whole line of what my opponents are going to do a lot more easily now, right?
Well, and I also have Sisay here at 10. And the other aspect of that is that you don't have the dockside line that lets you like jump over top of people. I mean, what it is a lot of your lines now are significantly more telegraphed than what they used to be.
Right. Right. And I think a big part of that is like I still am under the impression that folks are maybe not playing the best combos in Sisay. Like I still think that there is more experimentation that needs to be done with the deck. If I'm being frank, I think our defaults are a little bit like I feel like some people, apart from like Malcolm, who's always throwing paint at the wall, right? Like I feel like a lot of people just saw, okay, Teleria East put up one of the first results with Sisay after the bans, and so we're just going to copy their format over and over again, which is like I don't know if it's working for people, right? And even he's changing a lot of stuff, right? So like I don't know that's exactly a tried and true method at the current moment, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I will continue to be a proponent of the consult version of really using it to kind of pop off with like Jace, Wielder Mysteries, using that as like an easy tutor for that. It's not sexy. It doesn't feel as cool as the other like Rube Gold Machine things do, but it lets you play a good mid-range game plan where you're able to use Sisay to kind of go and get more mid-rangey pieces that let you kind of control the board a little bit more. And yeah, that is a different way of playing it, but I think that might be a way of taking it that fits what this metagame is giving us right now.
Yeah,
right?
I've definitely messed around with some more mid-range versions of Sisay that are just trying to play like the good stuff plan a little bit more. It's just you got to find the right balance, right? It's not full clam chowder where you're playing like Breach or whatever, right? But it's somewhat in between.
Yeah. No, I fully agree with you. That's what I have at 10 as well. Moving on up to number 9, Ian, what do you have here at 9?
I have Rogsai here at 9.
We're 2 for 2, same.
Hey, yo, let's go. We do not talk about this ahead of time, too.
We don't. We have zero conversation beforehand.
We haven't really been in sync like this in a long time. That's kind of funny.
Yeah, we are very in sync so far.
I was at the SCG that Rogsai won. The pilot was very good at what he did. I definitely made me put a little more respect on the deck. But also, it was one of those situations where, like, when I was in the pod, it was like a Keurig and a Rogsai, and then the other mid-range deck like tapped out turn 1 for a Grand Abolisher, and I was like, okay, I know how this game's gonna go. You know what I mean? So I think
that's always what happens. Anytime I see Rogsai win, it's always just like you look at the pod comp and you're like, well, yeah. Like I'm not shocked that it won there.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And so like I still have a lot of respect for the deck. I still think you're gonna play it in pods and it's still gonna smoke people for sure. I think you and I have talked about like a version that I'm kind of messing around with that like plays with a few things to the form of the deck that like I don't think like completely fundamentally changes it, but gives it a few different tools in the current metagame.
Gives it a little bit more play into the like
a little longer. Right. Yeah. I think the deck is still extremely strong. I think it's just you can't copy and paste what it looked like 6 months ago pre-ban and then expect it to do what it's supposed to be doing right now.
Yeah,
There's
and
still
even
really
some
good
of
pilots
the
out there who what.
Oh, go ahead.
I was saying there's still good pilots out there who can like put up numbers, and like we still saw it do like decently at King's Court last month, right? At the Royal Rumble, but like I still think it's just a deck that's struggling to lock in those numbers as much as it used to, you know.
Yeah, I my kind of feeling on Rogsai, I'm gonna be honest, it was real close. This and Sisay were real close to being on this list at all. I didn't feel strongly about either of them. And Rogsai is kind of in this position where, I mean, its win percentage is under average. Its top 16 percentage is under average. Now, that being said, we were not able to get the SCG information into here because SCG's information was incomplete. So that is like important context. But, you know, overall, if I take one tournament out and suddenly you drop down below average, that also says something about it as well too.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, you know, I think the deck is still fine. I don't think it is the boogeyman that it was before.
No, I think it's being a Swiss deck. You know what I mean? Like I expect it to like not clinch the tournaments a lot, but
it's not even doing well in Swiss.
Yeah.
Like that's what I think is wild, and I think part of it is that you know, we were talking about pod composition earlier, right? Where, you know, you look at these greedy pod compositions and you're like, well, no shit, Rogsai wins. When you're looking at the majority of the meta being Thras, Tymna, Glarb, Krom, Kinnan, that's not conducive to people not being able to deal with what you're doing really quickly, right? That is mid-range hell if I've ever seen it. And Rogsai has shown in the past that it is not good in mid-range meta games. And that's just where we're at right now. If the pendulum swings back the other way, it'll probably go right back up to the top, I'm sure. But right now, the way things are playing, I think it is probably, you know, if you're really good and experienced with how the deck plays, you can pull up some results with it. Otherwise, I would probably look at something else.
Yeah.
Moving on up, number 8, Ian. What do you have at 8?
Yeah. Also want to remind everybody, like, these are, I think you and I both agree in general, we tend to crab shack these a little bit, right?
A little bit.
We're saying like what the average player can probably do with these decks.
Yes.
Some of the qualifications may be a little bit different, but sort of going up later on, that'll come up a little bit more.
Yeah.
And it's actually very relevant for what we're talking about right now, which is Rog Thras. I have here at number 8.
Okay.
Rog Thras did decently this month. We have a tournament win under its belt, right? But this is one of those cases that, like, just like with Rogsai, if you take out the win from Sam Black, who's one of Magic's best players of all time,
like he's a Hall of Famer. If he's not a Hall of Famer yet, he is going to be a Hall of Famer.
He's like, I'm pretty sure he's a Hall of Famer for 60 card already, right? Like, and he's a decent, not decent. He's a very good cEDH player as well, right?
He is just a good Magic player.
Yeah, he's just very good at this game and also adapted to multiplayer very well indeed at the same time, right? So like, if you take out his results for last month, Rog Thras does not nearly look as good. And I think that's, I guess, the past 2 months, right? And that is definitely worth noting. I still think the deck is solid, right? Like I still think there's a pretty decent amount of folks showing up and doing well with it. It's just also a deck that is so easy to play poorly, and I've seen it many, many times. So you really got to be sure that like you're optimizing those windows, you're going for the right moments, all that kind of stuff when you're playing Rog Thras, because I do think it's a deck that is so easy to get obsessed with, like, oh look, I'm making 4 mana on turn 2, and then you're like, well cool, the deck does that all the time, what are you actually doing with it, you know? Like it's so easy to get lost in the sauce of that deck, but it's one of those decks where you really got to lock in your game plan, but if you can put up results with it, right? Which is why I think it's worthy of at least being on this top 10.
I won't get fooled again. That's how I feel with Rog Thras. Is every time I put it onto into my power rankings, I'm immediately hit with a month that is just like, boop, never mind. I feel very similarly to you. I think Rog Thras is a very good deck. It just, I don't know what it does better than like any of the decks at the top, or or any of the middle decks. Like, I don't know what it does significantly well to the point where I'm like, yeah, I gotta play that. You know what I mean? It just is a teamer. You doing okay there, buddy?
I was raising the desk, but then the camera got caught. It was just why I looked sideways. That was great. Okay.
Oh, that was fantastic. I was the look on your face of like abject horror. I was just like, oh no.
Well, I was like, I'm going to be responsible. I'm going to do this while Cal is in the middle of speaking. I'm going to put my microphone on mute. I'm not going to have the bzzz of the fucking desk going in the background.
Yeah.
But then just the camera went. For those audio listeners, I hit a hard 45 degree there on that.
Yeah, it was it was a bit of a shift there. I was like, what's going on over there? My number 7, I don't have Rog Thras. I have Tevesh Thrasios. Tev Thras has been putting up some results. I played against it a little bit while I was at MagicCon Chicago. It's a mid-range deck, and I think it's starting to justify Tevish's existence a little bit, which I think is like a big thing for it. I still haven't seen it, but you have really preached about how Mystic Duplication is like the truth in that deck. So that is interesting. But yeah, I have it here. It is a deck that performed fairly well. I mean, like 36% win percentage. It's only 12 entries, but like,
most of them being
pretty good.
Willie from New York. But yeah, that's my sort of. So I actually have Tev at number 7. I think
Tevet.
Huh?
You said you combine Tevish and Tivit.
No, I have Tev at number 7.
See, I heard Tevet.
Yes, no, Tev, Tez, and Tevesh at number 7. I think the Tevesh part is probably the worst part of that deck, if I'm being frank. I think like it's getting harder for me to argue why it should be Tevesh in the command zone. There are times when it pays off, realistically speaking, but like I do find a lot of the times that like when I was playing that deck, I would go, can I play Tevesh now? No, that sucks. Okay. And like compare it to Francisco, I'm like, yeah, I guess you play it over Francisco because fuck Francisco. But like that's
Francisco
really
doesn't do anything, right? Like,
but you can do the walking ballista with Agatha's Soul Cauldron. Yeah, no, it's a bad combo. Don't do it. And also the fact that you need a 3-part combo that can also just whiff. Like, please just stop playing Francisca. Like, I don't care that it's a body for Retraction Helix. You know what else is Polywog and Ledger Shredder and actual good cards like Kitsa. Like, just play those good cards, please.
No, I don't. I refuse. Yeah, no, I mean, it just. Like I feel very mid on the deck overall, but I do think it's like stronger than kind of the other 2 decks that we talked about previously.
I honestly feel like Sultai Thrasios should just be its own category at some point because it
honestly
really doesn't matter with the partners, if I'm being frank.
I mean, I think like Sultai and Esper are insanely well positioned right now. Which is a great transition to my number 7 because this is where I have Marnius Calgar.
We're now being shifted. I've noticed. We're one number off.
I like Marnius. I think if I take Tim's results out, it looks a lot worse. But
if you take Tim and specifically also Andre from Philadelphia, like there's really almost no results from Marnius.
But I have played against Marnius a little bit over this past weekend. I've seen it kind of function. It's a good deck. It will sneak up on you, I think is a really good way of putting it.
I think right now you can play most Esper commanders as just and I think we talked about this a little bit when we were talking about Hashaton, where it's like you can just sort of play generic Esper deck and then fill in the rest as you go.
And it's hard to lose with that combo right now. Honestly, it's really hard. But yeah, I like Marnius. I personally think some of its combos are a bit much, and take a little bit too much to get going. I think it's insane. I think it's really good. But I think it just because of how like much it kind of gets to get the like engine moving. I like it, not as much as other Esper options.
Yeah, and it's definitely one of those decks where you get to take the Esper options and like just sort of play a normal game plan, and then sometimes get away with murder, right? Like if you get Marnius with a Smothering Tithe out, you win that game in 99% of scenarios, right? So like
100%.
Kind of like it's the Esper deck that plays into the Esper strategies the most aggressively, and it gets away with it in a very good way, right? So like I think it's a really solid list. I think it's at my number 6. As I said, we're sort of one-off shifted at the current moment.
It was that Rog Thrash, man, that threw us off.
I know, it threw us off completely. But I do think like, if you take Andre and Tim out, like the deck has done nothing.
It just stops existing. Yeah.
Yeah, it really does,
And that's also why I have it behind, at number 6, this is where I have Tivit. This is why I have it behind Tivit, because even though Tivit's numbers are hitting right along the averages, I still think that the deck is maybe one of, if not the best positioned right now in this metagame, because it's able to just sit and do the Tivit game plan and just roll with the punches. And man, I played it a lot over the weekend, and I was just like, man, this deck, outside of the games I played with you, where you were high rolling every fucking Atali game we played.
Atali like 6 times.
It was like 6 games in a row we're sitting there, and I'm just like, well, Ian's going first in Atali, I'm going last on Tivit. I wonder how this game's gonna go.
No, you were behind me. Get out of here. You were second.
There were a couple that I was blasting.
That's fair. No, for sure. I was literally like, why couldn't I have this Atali run at a tournament?
It was great.
I won turn 2 like 3 or 4 times. Like, it was crazy. But no, so Tivit, I was kind of all in the camp for. I just haven't seen it do anything. Like I saw it do 1 top 4 recently.
It's because everybody is playing Hashaton and losing with Hashaton.
Yeah, well, that's a whole other discussion. We can talk about Hashaton for 2 seconds while we're talking Esper stuff. It's like I said a couple weeks ago, Hashaton, I think you're going to see Hashaton do poorly for the first X amount of time.
Build it differently, folks.
Yeah. And it's funny. So I actually had a session where I talked with Nick, who was the winner of the 50-person tournament. I think it was like a 56-person tournament with Hashaton the week afterwards. And the week after I top forward at Portland. And he immediately was like, oh yeah, I don't care if Hashaton dies, like it's a late game piece. And I was like, that's why you won a tournament with it.
Yep,
got it. Like
it was funny because we stayed up. I know we talked about this at MagicCon some, but I don't know if we talked about it on the show. No. We were up till like 3 a.m. with Jeremy talking about this deck,
screaming at this deck list. Yeah.
And the thing that's wild about it is then you came back from the event the next day and where it was like, I fucking hate this deck. And it was just like, you like come back to the group chat and you're like, this is all wrong. Like I top forward and I hate this.
No, that was during the building process. I think when I played it, I like was able to like actually use it the way I wanted it to. The day before, I was definitely like, ooh, is this gonna do what I needed to do in these games? And it did. And as I said, made top 4 with this. So
I think Hashaton, the way to go with it is just play Esper good stuff.
Yeah, you play like stuff and you can ignore it for most of the game, and at the end of the game, you're like, all right, play Hashaton, move to clean up. I don't know, a big stupid thing. And everyone's like, well, yeah, fair enough.
Yeah, that's everybody that I have seen try to build it with like the big fatties game plan.
Yeah. Turbo, I think the turbo version of that, right? Because like every version of Hashaton is still playing a bunch of big payoffs, right?
Right.
But we're talking about
the turbo fatties,
super fast version of it, right?
Yeah, it's just it's too loose. It's too loose. You got to tighten that shit up. What do you got here at 5, Ian?
5, I have Malcolm Vile.
Okay.
Since the ban, this deck has just been showing up. Like it's just been putting up result after result after result, and it's not winning a lot of tournaments, but it's top cutting like a motherfucker, right? Like it is one of the most consistent top cut decks just out there right now. And I think there's a lot of stuff to be said about that, right? I think it's way better than it was in a format where everyone could just like mana crypt into a Bowmaster at all times. Right now, you did lose the turn 1 Malcolms, but I also think like a lot of people would play turn 1 Malcolms poorly and over.
Hot take.
Turn 1 Malcolm.
Hot take. Losing Jewel Lotus was the best thing to happen to Malcolm decks and Tivit decks.
Yeah.
Was because everybody's like, oh, but you can't get it out faster. It's like, yeah, but neither of those decks want to get it out that fast. Actually, everybody who was throwing those out too fast
was losing them, and then
we're losing matches because of that.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
it's
no, I can fuck with that. Absolutely right. Like when you have a base underneath you before you play Malcolm, it turns out the deck actually performs better.
Yep.
And people were not just keeping like no land Jeweled Lotus hands, which I saw a disturbing amount of times from Malcolm pilots. But the deck's been
greedy
well. Like
fucks.
you do Grixis things, and then if the Grixis things don't work, you're like, all right, cool, I'll chill, and then you Buccaneer people, and then GG's. You know, like that's clean as it gets. It's just a deck that like consistently threatens wins when it looks like it's sort of just faffing about, you know.
Yeah.
Like
I think it is one of the few Grixis decks that like actively gives me a reason to play red, which I feel like I don't have a lot these days. Like a lot of it. What'd you say?
I said there's one very big reason, right? Which
well,
is
you know,
right?
Breach, sure.
Yeah.
But like every time I like sit and I'm looking at a Grixis Breach deck or playing Timnacrom, I'm like, I could just play Timnacrom and get access to white and it'd be like at least 50% better.
Probably.
And I feel like this is a deck that kind of justifies, hey, we're in Grixis for a reason. And I do like that about it. I don't have it on my top 10, and I think that is just because of the fact that like Malcolm Vial is one of those decks that's really touch and go. It's like Malcolm decks in general are either really good or really bad. And anytime it's the same thing with Rogthras, right? Where with Rogthras, every time I feel like I co-sign it, it immediately betrays me. So to the benefit of Malcolm pilots, I'm not co-signing it.
Malcolm Vial Smasher is cool, but what is your number 5, Cal?
This very natural transition. My number 5 here, I have Magda Brazen Outlaw.
Malcolm Brazen Outlaw.
There's too many M's going on right now. Yeah, I have Magda Brazen Outlaw. You know, listen, I have become a Magda believer over the past year. What'd you say?
I said, damn.
Yeah. Magda is one of those decks. It kind of sits right at the averages, honestly. But it also is good enough to put up a reasonable amount of top 16s and win a tournament. And I think that's something that I think is pretty like decent in this current day and age. I will forever put the caveat there that mono red is not my favorite, but Magda continues to just keep on doing its thing. And I appreciate that Magda is doing that. So I have Magda here at 5. Moving on up to 4, Ian. What do you have here at number 4?
Number 4, we have the mighty. Fantastic. Now, we have Thrasios Tymna.
Okay.
It's doing fine right now. It's not like, I think I had it at 3 last month, right? No, I had it at 2 last month. Yeah.
We had it like sharing with Tymna.
Yeah, I guess last year. But yeah, no, Thras Tymna is obviously still a very solid list. I just think it's getting, people are building it the same way, right? Like one of my big things at the start of the year was like, hey, Thrasios Tymna can be built in a bunch of different ways, and that's really exciting for it to be one of the top decks. And then everyone was like, but this way won a tournament one time, so that's how we're doing it. And I think that's kind of been where people have been locked in for a hot minute. I've seen some innovations with it, and those innovations have succeeded. And I've seen some people just try and copy and paste and play the same deck that other people are playing, that everyone knows how to play in a predictable way, and it's not working.
Well, and this is the thing about Thras Tymna that makes it good, is that, you know, I'm going to use an analogy here from back during the Flash Hulk days, right?
Yep.
Is what made it so potent, even before Thoracle came out, was you did not know what deck was sitting in front of you at any given time, because it could be any of like 8 different variations on this deck. And that is what made Thrasios Tymna the king for so long, is because every other deck, you knew exactly what you were setting up and signing up for. Thrasios Tymna, you were like, is this Razakats? Is this Hulk? Is this a whole other thing. And the fact that we are not doing that anymore, I get we don't have Flash, but there is way more of out there than just, you know, the Hazel's stuff, guys. Yeah. Hazel's is good. Don't get me wrong. It's really good.
Well, yeah, I mean, you can even still like play different versions and still play Hazel's, right? Like it's still like it, yeah, I think right now it's just like generic mid-range flood color deck, right? Which I think is doing fine, like it's doing decent numbers. I just think you're seeing it fall by the wayside because like if you look at that compared to Timna Crom can be copy and paste, right? And it gets hit on by less hate, right? Yeah. Whereas Thrasios and Timna, if people start pre-packing their curse totems and shit like that, guess what? The deck's going to fall pretty flat, you know?
Well, and the other aspect to this too is the fact that, you know, I think this is something I've said a lot on this channel of how Breach kind of determines a lot of the stuff that you put into a deck, and it kind of answers a lot of questions you have for it. Sure. Thrasios Timna does not have that card. And so a lot of the play patterns with the deck and a lot of the deck inclusions that you get are a lot weirder for people who are just like doing the like if you're copy pasting it right, the way you play it is maybe less obvious than the way you play Timna Crom, and I think that might have something to do with it too.
Yeah, super fair.
My number 4, this is where I have Glarb, Calamity's Augur. Glarb has been doing really well. Had as my honorable mention at the end of last year. This is a deck that I saw play against me. It should be on a Dead on Board gameplay that I was on here soon that I recorded at MagicCon. And I saw it do the whole Legolas's quick reflexes thing, where it just like pings down the board. And I saw it do that once and I was like, sold. I'm signing up. You got me.
Yeah.
But I do think my biggest hesitation to push it higher is it still does have a pretty low tournament count for a deck like this. It's still, you know, we're looking at Thras Timna 135 entries, Timna Crom 111, Kinnan 119. So we're still seeing it not even get to like a quarter of what, you know, the top dogs are doing right now. And so because of that, I'm a little less ready to go all in on it. Just because of the fact that, you know, we've seen decks like this before have good months, good couple of months, and then just kind of fall off once people stop playing it. And so we'll see what happens with it. But right now, I mean, I think the bones of a good deck are there.
Yeah, absolutely. I like Glarb. I think it's very solid right now. I have very little complaints about it, if I'm being honest. I got to play a couple games with it over the weekend, and it had a pretty solid win rate. It's my number 3. So I have it up here, number 3. A big part of that is it did have a very impressive win. We had Logan taking down the Snowy Summit with it, which was really cool because we had worked on the deck that week. Although he definitely brought some innovations of his own.
He made it look really good. I got to be honest. Like he made it look very good.
Yeah, with some you know anti-meta hate too, which was pretty sick. Like running the Reverent Silence and Vein of Progress in the 99 too, right? Which is pretty cool. But I think Glarb is a really cool deck in the sense that you do get to innovate with stuff like that. Play a few weird cards here and there, and then just kind of try and haymaker your opponents. But also like it just plays the fair game so well, right? My biggest problem with Glarb personally is that I wish it had better win conditions. Like I don't think that Doomsday is the truth, and we did see the winning deck lists this month move away from Doomsday as the line to go for. Thank goodness. Yeah, I know. But I do think it's a really sweet deck. I think it's got a lot of potential here in the format, and I'm excited to see where it goes. I think it's really interesting because Glarb as a commander is like people don't remove it, and I think that's correct. Like I think it's really hard to justify blowing up a Glarb. But as games get longer and things become inevitable, then the value from Glarb starts to snowball, right? Like it's not the best early game deck, right? But I do think as games go on, as games get longer, the value you get from Surveil turn after turn after turn after turn really does add up. Like it dodges a lot of shit draws, and that's where you really start to see Glarb thrive, right? Like it's one of the only decks in the format where you can resolve a Seaborn Muse. You're probably correct to not remove it, but then sometimes it will come back to bite you. You know, like
no, 100%. I also just like I think one of the things about it too is the games that I have played against it, one of the things I always try to gauge too is, Tivit is a deck that plays, it's heavy removal, heavy board wipe sort of thing.
Yeah.
And so when I want to see what decks do when their commanders aren't on the board.
Right.
And Glarb just kind of keeps going along. It doesn't do the top deck manipulation as well. And so you see it kind of drop off a little bit, but it still just does its thing. You know what I mean? And I think that is a quality that is really healthy, because if you can just kind of keep doing your thing, keep your game plan going without your commander, I think that says a lot about the integrity of the shell you've built around your deck, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. My number 3, speaking of, is Thrasios Tymna. For me, Thrasios Tymna just has the pedigree, right? It has the history behind it. I know it's going to continue to be good. And I think right now people are just being a little bit one note with it. And I think that is a player problem, not a deck problem. And I think those are two separate issues. But Thrasios Tymna, was dethroned there for a little while. But I think it is still just one of the top dogs. And I think it's really hard to bet against a deck like that.
Yep, makes sense.
Moving on up to our final 2. This is what I'm interested in. I'm curious how in line we are here. What do you have at number 2?
I got the Blue Farms.
Me too. All right. So I bet we are aligned then.
Yeah.
I also have Tymna Kraum here.
Yeah, Blue Furman. I'm actually surprised if are we sharing number 1 here? I'm very curious. We have to. I'm assuming.
I think we do.
Wow, this is a big change for you. Okay,
this is a big change for me.
Blue Farm's really solid. It's still doing the thing. It's still, people are showing up and have results with it. It's not oppressive like it was 6 months ago, right? We're seeing it show up, put in good work, put in solid effort, right? And that's the thing I really want to emphasize this month. Basically everything from Marnius onward, I was like, we really start to I think in the past the format was a lot more if you look at it as a graph, it was a lot more conic, right? As soon as you hit that top 10, it was the line from 0 to 100.
It was a lot more top heavy.
Yeah, it was so top heavy. Whereas right now the graph is like this. It's okay, you're the percentages maybe a little bit more than that, but honestly, at the end of the day, the percentages are not that crazy in comparison. The top decks to things that are showing up and doing well, right? The fact that there's one of the only wins this month is Heliod, right? Stuff like that is super indicative of the fact that the format's in a really healthy place, right? There was a time several months ago where we had 4 decks that had the only tournament wins in the format.
Yep.
That's not where we're at. Thank God. So there's a lot of really cool stuff happening with this. Tymna Kraum, as I said, still super solid, able to be a little more proactive. You can go more towards the Ignacy type of way to playing it, where you're the Tremnek way, where you're a little faster, Blue Farm, a little more turbo, and then have the grind pivot. Or you can go into the, full, some people not even playing Adnaz style Blue Farm, which is grindier, crunchier, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, the Callahan variant. But it's strong because it's able to pivot between those realities. It's able to care about the board state. It's able to not care about the board state and have plans for either of those scenarios, right? A number of different top cuts in. We haven't done a breakdown since the Royal Rumble, right? But we had Maddie in the top 4 of the Rumble with Blue Farm control, which was not it was on Necro and stuff like that, but the deck was very much a tempo based control deck.
It looked a lot like my Tivit deck, honestly.
Yeah.
That's what it reminded me the most of. It was Tivit deck that has a Necro so that it can kind of pop off a little bit faster
when it needs to. Exactly. Yeah. So I think there's a lot of really interesting stuff there from these decks, and I think Tymna Kraum's still doing stuff, and I think we're starting to see some innovation in that department, which is really cool. I think it's a deck that could use some fresh love after years and years of sort of copy pasta,
being the exact same deck for 3 years.
I
mean, I have it here at number 2 as well. I echo a lot of what you're saying, and I think I said this a little bit earlier, the reason I have it over a Thras Tymna is I think its play patterns are a little bit more obvious than a Thras Tymna. Thras Tymna, I think you can get caught in it. I know this because I do it myself, is you can kind of get caught in the trap of turn 2 Tymna, that's good. You know what I mean? It's really easy to get caught in that loop, and it's really easy to get caught in some poor play patterns with that deck. And so because of that, I think Timna Crom is a little bit more obvious in how you're supposed to play the deck. And because of that, I like it here at 2. Number 1, this is where I think we are aligned on what we have here at 1. But Ian, what do you have here at number 1?
I have Kinnan.
Me as well.
Hey, dog.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, Kinnan's been putting in the work. I think Kinnan is just really solid right now, and a lot of the inconsistencies we were seeing in last format we're not seeing right now, right? Like the Kinnan's had the potential to be winning tournaments, as you know, pilots like myself and several others were showing in the past meta, right? But it was also not doing well on a wide scale, and yet and I think we do have to give a little bit of credence to, like, if you take out the fact that like Waffle has been playing a lot of Kinnan and putting up a good amount of results with it these past couple months. That is fair, right? But on the other hand, like, we had a win on Kinnan last weekend by a completely different pilot. And I think that there's a lot of folks showing up with Kinnan. It's consistently performing. It's consistently doing well. It's consistently making top cuts. It's just being solid at doing what it needs to do, right? It's establishing engines, it's playing a high card quality, it's able to win early, it's able to win late.
Right.
It's so consistent at doing its game plan, right? And that's where its strength lies,
The thing I really like about Kinnan right now is it mid-ranges about as good as any deck out there can.
Yeah.
And this is a format where, specifically, if you were able to put cards onto the battlefield without needing to like cast spells,
so big.
You are already like leaps and bounds ahead of most other decks. And I think, like, I played against Kinnan a little bit over the weekend. I do think it is important. I don't know that it is like a whole head better than any of the other like top 4 decks that I have here. I think they're all about the same. If I'm being honest, I think it's, they're both very similar and close. I think what the difference is Kinnan has that explosivity that it can do. And I think that is what kind of pushes it over the edge, because all of these decks grind like a motherfucker, right?
Yeah.
And the big difference to me is Kinnan is, of those 4 decks, able to get out ahead of stuff, probably the best of all 4 of them.
I'd have to.
So I think that is a huge
right?
part.
Like, I think.
Yeah, I do. I think Breach lets you, and then again, that's why I have it here at 2. But I think, like, in a format where you're not trying to cast a bunch of spells to win really quickly, the fact that Kinnan can kind of get ahead of Heuristic Study is huge.
Big.
And that's a huge piece for Kinnan. So I like Kinnan a lot. I know that's not a normal thing for me to be saying.
I know.
But again, hey, listen, I am willing to adjust my opinions. I am not a dogmatic person. I will sit here and be like, listen, I was wrong on that one. Is what it is, right? I love being wrong. So it means that I took a big swing and I adjusted an opinion.
Hell yeah.
If that's how I feel about it. But Kinnan right now, I think, is very good. I still have some reservations about Kinnan, generally speaking. But I also recognize that is because I play a deck that has a very good matchup against it. So
I think, well, Tivit's a good deck to make sure Kinnan doesn't win. I don't know if Tivit's a good deck against Kinnan, if that makes sense.
My experience with Tivit, now granted, I play probably a more board wipe heavy version of it, is that Tivit is really good at doing board control. And if Kinnan isn't allowed to have a board, it
the deck for sure.
Yeah, it doesn't do much. And that was also my observation with Glarb, by the way, is that Glarb is a deck that if you don't let it establish a board state, you can kind of get ahead of it.
Sure.
But that's very different from like a Timna Crom, right? Where it can just kind of be like, here you go. And I do think those are pros and cons, but I think generally speaking, I think Kinnan can rebuild probably the best of all of them too. And that is a huge, huge piece for that. But overall, what are your thoughts on the metagame right now? I think it is glorious.
Oh yeah,
I love it.
Yeah, like I went to MagicCon and played a bunch of different decks. All of them felt very viable at different times during the equation, right? Like this is open season as far as CEDH is concerned. Like we have a top 10 here, but it's like, as I said, as soon as he hit like 5, I was just like, I don't know, this one's been doing well this month, but like could be literally any of the top 20, 30 decks the next month, right? Like I would not be surprised to see most of these decks off my top 10, not because I'm expecting things to just dominate, just because like it's so fluid right now, right? Like every single month, I guarantee is going to see different decks with different performances, and I think there's going to be a lot of shifting consistently through this format. I think things are far from solved. The only thing that feels like pretty true to me is like having blue is really damn good right now, and like Ristic Study is a fucking annoying card, and like that's the only things that I see are consistently true in this format right now.
I think, you know, the more I look at this format, the more I am, you know, first of all, I kind of expect Hashaton to get figured out soon. Like, I think people are going to figure it out.
Sure.
I don't think it is even remotely close to being there right now. I think the way it is currently getting played, but like Hashaton's a deck that I'm really pretty confident will be a top 10 deck, right? Like it just has the DNA of a deck that should be up here.
It reminds me of Kinnan a year ago in the sense that like good pilots are going to do well with it. Bad pilots are really going to struggle with it, but it's still going to be in the top tables a lot because the good pilots are doing well with it.
Exactly. You know, I think that is a piece to that. I think Yuriko's got a lot of good new pieces recently. And
yet
here we are. But I'm interested to see what we can get from it. I
genuinely think we're back to the point where Turbo Yuriko is something that people need to start exploring. I think Yuriko is so good at getting you the board state you want. And like the problem is consistently, and I talked with a bunch of Yuriko pilots literally very recently about this, which was like they would get the board state they want and they go, there is no conceivable way for me to push a win in this pod. And it's like, maybe it's just time to like slam a Necro and accept the fact that you're going to play 10 bad cards, which is like you're playing 10 bad cards anyways. It's just like you're not burning people anymore, you know?
Well, I mean, that will always be kind of my issue with Yuriko. There are times when you just like hit 3 mocks off the top in a row and you're just like, well, I guess this is done fuck all for me. And I think that is a real piece of that. I also would like to see Plagon kind of get its numbers pushed a little bit more. I think more people need to pick it up.
Speaking of hard decks, right? Like
that's a very hard deck, but you know, as somebody who played against it a couple times and has, you know, helped you brew some of it and has goldfish a reasonable amount, it has what it needs to be a successful deck. It's just I don't think whatever is going on with it right now is working. But I think it has the DNA
to the tournament in December, right? So like clearly it's still capable of doing that. It's
100%.
That's another deck that I think, you know, I said that as soon as I played it the first time. I was like, I do not recommend people pick this up right away because this is not an easy deck, right? Like it's an amazing deck. It's so fun. It's so unique. It's so cool. But easy is not ever a word I would associate with it.
I don't know. There's just a lot of stuff here on this like 10 or more list that I'm looking at. And I'm like, man, I think a lot of these decks are well positioned. Like a lot of them are. I have a hard time being like, I don't think you should play that. I mean, there's a couple. I think Rogsai right now in this metagame, like I think if you are experienced with it, it's gonna be really good. But like there's a couple like that. Najila is another one where I'm like, I don't know if I'd play that in this metagame. But you know, other than that, like feels wide open. So
I agree.
I don't know. But with that being said, Ian, if folks would like to get some coaching on this metagame and get some help improving their play, how could they do that?
Yeah. So imagine you're here listening to this episode and you go, well, I think Cal is so wrong and my deck deserves to be up in this top 10. Well, we can help make that happen. Find me over at
We would love to see that
happen. ComedIanMTG@gmail.com, or find me on X or Blue Sky or Instagram, any of those places. Just shoot me a DM. And we're super happy to set things up. I have a full breakdown, rate sheet, et cetera, et cetera. I can send over to folks. I'm also, by the time this episode airs, if it comes out Monday, I currently have a sale going on right now. The TLDR is that I was able to go to Fishbowl when I didn't think I'd be able to because of some awesome friends. So I have my pay it forward sale going on right now. So if it is before 3/8,
you can get 20% off up to 2 coaching sessions right now. So shoot me those DMs, all that kind of stuff. As long as you book before 3/8, then we're all good. And if I don't get back to you, it's probably because I'm at Fishbowl. Don't worry about it.
Yeah. Also, make sure that if you want to support us, you can go to patreon.com/the Mind Sculptors and help us out. If there's like patron rewards that you're interested in, let me know. We're really looking to like revamp that stuff here in 2025. I know I've been saying that for a year, but like 2025 is going to be our year.
Yeah.
But yeah. With that being said, I'm Cal.
I'm Ian.
Stay sculpty, everybody. Bye.
Bye.